The settlement was not a town. It was a scar, carved into the high valley on the ragged edge of the Montana Territory. It existed for one reason: to bleed the mountains of their golden fur, and to bleed the men who did the work of their wages. It was a place of mud, rough-sawn lumber, and cold eyes. Outside the meanest of these structures, a homestead that was really just a large shack, a woman was chained to a post. The post was for tethering horses. The chain was for logging. Both were now used to hold Lena. She had been there for 3 days, or maybe it was 4. Time had become a blur of cold and shame. The cold was a constant, a thing that had moved past her skin and now lived deep in her bones. A cold that promised to stop her heart long before the hunger did. The shame was a newer, sharper pain. It came from the eyes of the people who passed. The settlement of Two Forks had no real law, but it had spectators. They watched her. The children were curious, daring each other to run close before retreating with giggles. The men were worse. They would stop, look her over, some with pity, most with a calculating, quiet cruelty. Some would spit tobacco juice near her feet. She was a thing to be looked at, a warning, a piece of property put on display by its owner. Her body was a map of that ownership. Her face was swollen, one eye a slit of purple and yellow. Her dress, already a thin calico rag, was torn at the shoulder, revealing the dark, blooming bruises beneath. The iron cuff around her wrist had rubbed the skin raw, a bloody bracelet that matched the one on her ankle. She was half-starved. The hunger, a hollow ache that had long ago replaced all other feelings. She did not cry. She had done that at first, and it had earned her a beating that sent the world black. Now, she held her head as high as she could, her eyes fixed on the gray line of the Bitterroot Mountains to the north. She focused on the wind, the only thing that felt clean, as it cut through her thin clothes and made her shiver so hard her teeth ached. The whispers followed the wind. "Heard she tried to run again," a woman muttered to another, pulling her shawl tighter as she hurried from the mercantile. "That's the 3rd time?" "Fool girl," the other replied, not lowering her voice. "Amos bought her fair, paid good money down in Colorado. What'd she expect? Him to just let her walk off? Still, it's a terrible thing, chained up like a dog. He has to break her, same as a horse. You spare the rod, you spoil the... Well, she'll learn her place or she'll die of the cold. Either way, it ain't our trouble." No one knew the truth. The stories changed with the telling. She was a gambler's debt. She was a mail-order bride who'd refused the man. She was an outlaw's woman he'd won in a card game. The one thread of truth in all the rumors was her name: Amos. Amos was the man who owned the shack, the post, and the chain. He was the one who had beaten her, who had dragged her back when she'd run, and who now left her to the judgment of the elements and the town. And no one helped her. To help her would be to cross Amos, and Amos was a big man with a loud voice and a heavy hand, quick to anger and slow to forget. In a place like Two Forks, minding your own business was the first rule of survival. Lena was not their business. Into this frozen tableau of cruelty and indifference rode Elias. He came down from the high country, a man who seemed to be made of the same rock and shadow as the mountains themselves. He was tall, wide in the shoulders, and moved with a silence that was unsettling. His beard was full, streaked with gray and brown, and his hair was long, tied back with a leather thong. He smelled of pine smoke, cured leather, and the sharp, clean scent of the cold. His eyes, set deep under a heavy brow, were the color of a winter sky, and they missed nothing. His horse was a sturdy roan, built for climbing, and the mule he led was burdened with a winter's worth of trapping: prime beaver, fox, and marten pelts, stacked high and tight. He rode past the post, his gaze sweeping over the settlement. He saw the saloon, the mercantile, the blacksmith's shop, and he saw the woman. He stopped his horse. He did not look away, did not pretend it was a passing glance. He looked at her. He took in the chain, the raw skin, the puffed and discolored eye. He saw the way she shivered, a constant, rattling tremor that shook her whole frame. He saw the rags she wore and the way the wind pressed them against her thin body, showing the ribs beneath. Lena felt his eyes on her. This gaze was different. It wasn't hungry like the other men's. It wasn't judging like the women's. It was heavy. It was a weighing, measuring look, as cold and hard as the land itself. She expected him to move on, to spit, to say something. He did none of those things. He just watched. For a long minute, the only sound was the wind and the jingle of his harness. Then she did something she had not done for any of the others. She met his gaze. She stared straight at this mountain man, from her one good eye, and held it. There was no plea in her look. There was no fear. There was just a hard, bottomless pit of defiance, a final, flickering ember of a soul that refused to be extinguished. She was daring him to look, to judge, to ride on and be damned just like the rest. Elias saw it. He saw the fire buried deep under the ice. He had seen that look once before, in the eyes of a wolf he had cornered in a trap, a wolf that had tried to chew its own leg off to be free. It stirred something in him, a low, cold ache he had not felt in years. It was a feeling he had buried with his wife and child, back in Kansas, before the raiders and the fire. He said nothing. He nudged his horse forward, tied the animals to the rail in front of Potter's Mercantile, and went inside. His heavy footsteps echoing on the boardwalk, he did not look back. Lena watched him go. He was just like the rest. A long, shuddering breath escaped her, turning white in the air. The cold was getting worse. The sun was starting to dip behind the peaks, painting the snow in shades of purple and blood. Inside the Mercantile, Elias was all business. He traded his pelts for the things he would need to survive the deep winter: sacks of flour, a slab of salt pork, coffee, salt, sugar, beans. He bought ammunition for his rifle and lead for new bullets. He bought a new axe head and a whetstone. He spoke only when necessary, his voice a low rumble, rough from disuse. "That'll be all," he said to Mr. Potter, who was nervously counting out the value of the furs. "Good haul this season, Elias," Potter said, trying to make conversation. Elias was his best trapper, and his furs were always prime. "Should be enough left for a bottle, or a night at the saloon." Elias just looked at him, his face unreadable. He slung a 100-pound sack of flour over one shoulder as if it were a coat, picked up the other bags, and walked out. He loaded the mule, his movements economical and precise. He worked with his back to the woman, but he was aware of her in every fiber of his being. He could hear the faint, metallic clink of the chain as she shivered. He finished his packing. He should ride out. The snow was starting to fall now, small, hard flakes that stung his cheeks. The trail up to his cabin was treacherous in a storm. He should go. He found himself walking toward the saloon. He did not want whiskey. He did not want company. But he knew, with a certainty that settled in his stomach like a stone, that he needed to know who the man was. The saloon was loud, hot, and smelled of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and despair. A tinny piano was being abused in the corner. Elias pushed through the doors and the room quieted for a half-second. The townsmen and miners saw him, marked him as a man of the mountains, and dismissed him. He was no threat to their games, no competition for the painted, tired-looking woman at the bar. Elias moved to the end of the bar, in the shadows, and ordered a whiskey. He did not drink it. He held the glass, its warmth a small, insignificant thing in his calloused hand, and he listened. It did not take long. "Another drink for Amos," a large, booming voice declared. "And for any man who'll drink to me." A chorus of cheers went up from a table in the center. Elias turned his head, just enough. He saw the man, Amos. He was big, bigger than Elias, but it was a soft, fleshy bigness. He had a red, blotchy face, a thick, tangled beard, and small, piggy eyes. He was drunk, flush with arrogance and cheap whiskey.
"You showed her, Amos!"
One of the men at his table slurred, raising his glass. "Damn right, I showed her," Amos bellowed, slamming his fist on the table so hard the glasses jumped. "That one, she's got a mean streak, a wild streak. Thought she could just run off. Thought she was too good for me." He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "She ain't too good for nothing now. She's learned, I broke her. Boys, I broke her like a wild Mustang." He took a long pull from his bottle. "She thought she was free. Nobody's free. Not when I pay good coin for 'em. She's property. And you gotta be firm with property. Or it gets ideas." Another round of laughter. In the corner, Elias's hand tightened on his glass. He felt the old, familiar rage, the one he had thought was long dead. It was a white-hot thing, a fire that started in his belly and rose up his throat, tasting of ash and blood. He remembered the smell of his burning homestead. He remembered finding what was left of his wife, Sarah, and his little girl, May. He had hunted those men down, one by one, and he had not been merciful. It had emptied him. It had driven him up here, to the high, lonely places where the only thing to kill was his supper, and the only one to talk to was himself. He had sworn off the world of men. He had sworn off its casual brutality, its pointless, stupid violence. He looked at Amos, who was now telling a filthy story to his snickering friends. He thought of the woman outside. He thought of her defiant eye. He set the glass down on the bar, the whiskey untouched. He laid a coin beside it and turned. He walked out of the saloon, the blast of hot, foul air following him into the night. The snow was falling thick and fast now, a curtain of white that muffled all sound and turned Two Forks into a ghost town. The wind was high, howling down from the peaks. A blizzard. Elias stood by his horse. He should ride. He should ride hard and get to the high pass before the snow made it impossible. He had his supplies. He could hole up in his cabin for 6 months. And by spring, the woman at the post would be nothing but a frozen memory, a pile of bones for the wolves. It was not his business. He put his hand on his horse's neck. The animal was restless, eager to be moving, to be warm in its small stable. "I know, boy," Elias muttered. "It's a fool thing." He looked toward the shack. It was dark. Amos was still at the saloon, drinking himself into a stupor. He would be there for hours, but she would not. She would be dead by morning. The cold was a patient killer. He pulled his hat down low, untied his horse, and led it, with the mule, into the dark alley between the mercantile and the blacksmith's. He tethered them there, where they were out of the worst of the wind. From his saddle, he took 2 things, a long coil of rope and the new hand axe. He moved through the snow like a shadow. He was not a town man, but he was a hunter. He knew how to be silent, how to blend with the darkness. The wind covered the sound of his boots crunching in the fresh snow. He reached the post. Lena was barely conscious. She was slumped against the wood, the chain holding her up. She had tried to huddle into herself, but the shivering was so violent it had exhausted her. She was in the place between worlds, a gray, numb fog where she no longer felt the cold, only a deep, profound tiredness. She dreamed of her mother's kitchen, of the smell of baking bread. Then a shadow fell over her. She flinched, a small animal sound escaping her throat. "No, Amos, please." The shadow did not speak. It was not Amos. This man was quieter, more solid. He knelt in front of her. She saw the glint of steel. A knife. She shut her eyes, waiting for the cut. Elias ignored her. He examined the lock on the chain. It was a heavy, rust-caked thing. He could pick it, given time. He did not have time. He stood up. He put his foot against the post for leverage, placed the blade of the hand axe against the main link of the chain near the lock, and struck the back of the axe head with his gloved fist. It was a test. The iron was old, brittle from the cold. He raised the axe. Lena cringed. He brought it down, not on her, but on the lock itself. The sound was sharp, a high-pitched crack that shattered the night's silence. The lock held. He struck it again, a heavier, more certain blow. The metal shrieked and splintered. He struck it a third time, with all his weight and all his focused rage. The lock burst open, the chain falling free with a heavy clank. Lena, her support gone, crumpled forward into the snow. Before she could land, Elias had her. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. She was a bundle of bones and rags in his arms. She was terrified, but she was too weak to fight. Her mind was a fog of fear. Rescued or claimed? A new owner? "Please," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Water." "Quiet now," he said. It was the first time she had heard his voice. It was deep, like stones rubbing together. "We're leaving." He carried her to the alley. He did not have time to be gentle. He set her on her feet, and she collapsed against the horse. He held her up with one hand, and with the other. He unstrapped his bedroll. He wrapped her in the first wool blanket, then a second. He took the heavy cured bearskin from his mule's pack and wrapped her in that, a thick, warm cocoon. He lifted her and set her in his saddle, sideways, like a child. He took the rope and, working quickly, tied her to the saddle, a loose binding knot that would keep her from falling but not cut into her. She was barely aware, drifting, whispering. "Not again. Let me die." "Not tonight," Elias said, to her or to himself. He was not sure. He mounted behind her, his big body a shield against the wind. He grabbed the mule's lead and kicked the roan into a walk. They moved out of the alley, not toward the main road, but behind the buildings, into the darkness. The snow was a blessing, covering their tracks almost as soon as they were made. Within 5 minutes, they had cleared the settlement. Elias turned the horse north, toward the high pass, and urged him into a steady, ground-eating trot. The world dissolved into a howling vortex of white. The wind screamed, and the snow came down so thick Elias could barely see his horse's ears. He rode by feel, by the instinct of a man who has lived in this wilderness for a decade. He knew the lay of the land, the curve of the creek, the saddle of the ridge. Lena was a still, cold weight in front of him. He could feel the faint tremors that racked her body. He held her steady with one arm. His own body heat a small offering against the blizzard. Hours passed. The horse, protected from the worst of the wind by a line of trees, climbed steadily. Elias was a statue, his face frozen, his eyes slits against the driving snow. He thought of his cabin. He thought of the fire, the stacked wood, the food. He thought of the men back in Kansas. He had been too late then. He had been a farmer, a husband, a father. He had not been ready for the violence when it came. He had failed. He held the woman tighter. He was not that man anymore. Dawn came not as a light, but as a lessening of the dark. The blizzard had not stopped, but it had eased. The world was a uniform gray-white. Ahead, through the trees, was a wisp of smoke. His cabin, it was small, built of thick, notched logs, with a sod roof now buried under 3 feet of snow. It was chinked tight, with a low door and one small window. It was a fortress against the cold. A small stable, dug into the side of the hill, was attached. He rode the horse into the stable. The warmth and smell of hay and animal was immediate. He dismounted, his legs stiff and aching. He cut the ropes that held Lena, and gently, he lifted her down. She was a dead weight, her head lolling back. Her eyes were closed. He carried her from the stable, through the short, snow-dug tunnel, and kicked open the cabin door. The warmth hit them. A low fire was burning in the large stone fireplace that took up one whole wall. He had banked it well. The cabin was one room, clean and spare. A cot on one side, a rough-hewn table and 2 stools. Shelves held dried herbs, jars of preserves, and books. Furs were piled on the floor. He carried her to the pile of furs nearest the fire and laid her down. She was still wrapped in the blankets, a frozen, still cocoon. He did not stop. He stoked the fire, adding logs until it was a roaring blaze. He filled a kettle with water from a bucket and set it on the hob. He lit a lantern, though the gray light was now filtering through the window. He went back to Lena. He unwrapped the bearskin, stiff with ice. He unwrapped the wool blankets. She was curled in a tight ball, shivering violently. Her old dress was frozen stiff. "Gotta get these off," he said, his voice quiet. She did not respond, just shivered. He took his knife. He did not try to unbutton the rags. He simply inserted the blade and cut the frozen calico from her. Splitting it up the back, he cut away the rags from her feet. He left her in her thin shift, what was left of it. He saw the full extent of the damage. Her back was a mass of welts and old, puckered scars. Her ankles and wrists were raw, bleeding and swollen. Her feet were blue. He went to the kettle. The water was steaming. He poured it into a tin basin, added a handful of salt, and then a dipper of cold water until it was just warm. He took a clean rag. He knelt beside her. "This will sting," he said. He began to clean her wounds. He was gentle, but firm. His hands, which were big enough to break a man's neck, were surprisingly deft. He cleaned the raw, open sores on her wrists and ankles. He washed the dried blood from her face. She whimpered when he touched the raw skin, but she did not pull away. She was watching him, her one good eye open, tracking his every move. She was wary, like a trapped animal. She did not know what he wanted. She did not know if this was a kindness or just the prelude to a different kind of cruelty. He finished. He dried her with another clean cloth. He went to a wooden chest at the foot of his cot and pulled out a thick, gray wool shirt. One of high, it was worn, but clean. He tossed it onto the furs beside her. "Put this on. It's warm." He turned his back to her, giving her the only privacy the small cabin could offer. He went to the fire and sat on a low stool. Pulling the whetstone and his skinning knife from his belt, he began to sharpen the blade. The rhythmic shing, shing, shing of stone on steel, the only sound in the room besides the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Lena watched his broad back. He had not touched her in any way but to clean her wounds. He had not spoken, except to warn her. He was not Amos, but what was he? Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely grasp the shirt. She fumbled, pulling her arms from the rags of her shift and pushing them into the warm, heavy wool. The shirt fell to her knees. It smelled of him, of smoke and pine and cold air. It was the warmest thing she had felt in a year. Elias heard her rustling. He stoked the fire, then took a tin cup, dipped it into the pot of broth he'd set to warm, and turned. She was sitting up, huddled in his shirt, her knees drawn to her chest. Her eyes were huge in her bruised face. He held out the cup. "Drink this." She hesitated, then took it with both hands. The hot, salty broth burned her throat. But it was life. She drank it greedily, scalding her tongue. Elias sat on his stool again, across the hearth from her. He did not take his knife back out. He just sat, his hands resting on his knees, and watched the fire. He gave her space. Lena finished the broth. She clutched the empty cup to her chest. She was warm. The chain was gone. She was in a strange man's cabin, in the middle of a blizzard, and her owner would be hunting her. But she was warm. She curled into a ball on the furs, pulling them around her. She stared into the flames, her mind a riot of fear and exhaustion. She tried to stay awake, to watch the silent man who had saved her, or stolen her. She did not know which. She watched him until the flames blurred, until the warmth soaked into her, until the exhaustion finally claimed her. But she did not sleep. Sleep was a luxury for people who were safe, and she did not know if she would ever be safe again. She just watched the fire, and listened to the man's steady breathing in the quiet, warm room. The blizzard that had brought them to the cabin did not relent for 3 days. It was a howling white siege, erasing the world outside, shrinking their existence to the 4 log walls. The wind shrieked like a living thing, a mourner at the world's funeral. Inside, there was silence. Lena spent those first days on the pile of furs by the fire, a small, huddled shape lost in Elias's shirt. She was a creature of observation. She watched him. She learned the rhythms of his life, which were as spare and deliberate as the man himself. He rose before the first gray light, moving without a sound. He would stoke the fire, put coffee on to boil, and then go to the stable, disappearing for an hour. When he returned, dusted with snow, he would drink his coffee black and scalding, standing by the window, staring into the white fury of the storm. He would mend his traps, his large hands working with sinew and wire. He would oil his rifle, the scent of the gun oil sharp in the small space. He would cook, a simple, simmering stew of dried venison and beans, or a thick, hot gruel. He would eat, then gesture with the spoon toward the pot, a silent offering for her to feed herself. And she did. She ate, her body's desperate hunger overcoming the fear in her mind. Her fear, however, was a constant companion. It lived in her muscles. When Elias moved too quickly, she would flinch, her shoulders hunching, her hand coming up to protect her face. It was a reflex, beaten into her, as involuntary as breathing. The first time it happened, he had been reaching for the coffee pot on the hob, his arm passing through the space near her. She had shrunk back so fast she almost fell into the embers, a small, choked sound escaping her. Elias froze. He looked at his own hand, then at her, his face a mask of stone. He said nothing, but after that, he made sure to give her a wide berth. He would move the pot before she woke, or wait until she had moved away from the hearth. He never touched her, not once, beyond that first night of cleaning her wounds. He was a silent, distant presence, a guardian or a jailer. She could not tell. On the 4th day, the wind died. The silence that fell was almost as loud as the storm had been. Lena felt it press against her. She had been healed. She had been fed. She was strong enough now to feel the weight of her uncertainty. He was outside, shoveling a path to the stable. She watched him through the small, clean square of the window. He was powerful, his movements economical, the snow flying from his shovel. He was not like Amos. Amos was loud and soft, and his violence was hot and unpredictable. This man was quiet and hard, and his strength seemed to be held in a tight, cold reserve. She needed to know. When he came back inside, stamping the snow from his boots, she was standing. It was the first time she had stood to face him. Her voice was a dry croak, unused. Why? He stopped, his heavy coat halfway off. He looked at her. He thought she meant the shovel, the path. Stable roof needed clearing. Weight of the snow. No. She took a breath, the cold air still clinging to him, stinging her lungs. Why me? In town? Why take me? Elias pulled the coat from his shoulders and hung it on a peg. He turned his back to her, busying himself with the fire, adding a log, poking the embers. He was a long time answering. Lena thought he would not, that he would dismiss her, as he did everything. He stopped poking the fire, but kept his back to her. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of any feeling. Because no one else was going to. He said it like it was the simplest, most obvious thing in the world. A fact, like the snow was white or the fire was hot. He did not say it to be kind. He said it because it was the truth. He sat on his stool, picked up a trap, and began to test the spring. The conversation was over. Lena sat back down on the furs, because no one else was going to. It was not the answer she expected. It was not a claim of ownership. It was not a boast of heroism. It was an absence of help from anyone else. filled by this one silent man. It settled in her, a strange, small seed of something she could not name. That night, she watched him as he sat by the fire. Long after he thought she was asleep, he was not mending. He was just sitting, staring into the flames, one hand wrapped around a tin cup of whiskey. He never drank during the day, but at night, he would have this one cup. He was not just staring at the fire, he was staring through it. Elias was a man who had built a wall around himself, stone by stone. He had come to these mountains to be alone, to let the silence and the cold scour him clean of the past. He had come here to die, in a way, or at least to stop living. He looked at the sleeping woman. He had not wanted this. He had not wanted to stray. He saw his wife, Sarah. He saw her laughing, her hands in a bowl of flour. He saw her in the garden, her face shaded by a straw hat. He had been a farmer, a husband, a man who believed in the turning of the seasons, in the goodness of hard work. Then the raiders had come. Not soldiers, not Indians, just men who rode for the pleasure of burning, of taking. They had come at dusk. He had been in the south field, mending a fence. He heard the screaming. He ran. He ran for a mile, his lungs bursting, his heart a cold stone of dread. He was too late. The homestead was a pyre. The flames were high. He had found Sarah near the well. What they had done to her. He had covered her with his shirt. He had called for his daughter, May, his little May, who was only 6. He found her in the barn, hidden in the hayloft. She had not been hidden well enough. The man who had been Elias died that night. A different man was born, a man made of nothing but rage and ash. He had hunted them. It had taken him 6 months. He had found all 5 of them, from Kansas to the Oklahoma territories. He had not been quick. He had remembered his wife's face. He had remembered his daughter's small, broken body. When it was done, he was empty. The rage was gone, burned out. There was nothing left inside him. So he had walked north, away from the world of men, away from the flat, scorched land that held his dead. He had walked until he found the highest, coldest, most unforgiving place he could. He had built this cabin with his own hands, a tomb for a man who was still breathing. For 10 years, it had worked. The silence, the work, the cold. It had kept the ghosts at bay. And then he had ridden into 2 Forks. He had seen Lena. He had seen her defiance, the last unbroken thing about her. And it had stirred the dust. It had woken something. A protector, a husband, a father. He looked at Lena, curled in his old shirt, her body a map of someone else's brutality. He felt the old rage simmer, low and hot. But beneath it, there was something else, a deep, aching guilt. He had saved this one. He had not saved them. He finished his whiskey, the raw spirit doing nothing to warm the ice in his center. He had sworn off the world, but he had brought the world, in the form of this broken woman, into his home. He did not know if he was her rescuer, or just her new, silent captor. Lena began to heal. The body is a stubborn thing. It wants to live. The bruises on her face faded from dark purple to a sickly yellow, then vanished, leaving her skin pale and taut. The cuts on her wrists and ankles, tended daily by Elias with a strong-smelling herbal salve, closed up. They left angry, pink scars, new lines on a body already marked by a hard life. She ate. At first, it was broth, then the thick stew. Elias was a good hunter. There was always meat. She felt the strength seep back into her limbs. The hollowness in her stomach was replaced by a different kind of ache, a restlessness. She was still ashamed. She had one garment, his shirt, when he would leave to check his trap lines, a long, looping journey that took half the day. She would heat water and wash it, scrubbing it with the harsh lye soap. She would stand wrapped in a blanket, shivering by the fire, waiting for it to dry. She would wash herself, too, a quick, frantic scrub in the tin basin, her eyes always on the door. terrified he would return. She would see the old scars, the white, puckered lines on her back and thighs, the marks of her past owners. She would see the new scars. She felt damaged, used, a thing that had been broken and poorly mended. Just as her strength returned, just as the restlessness began to make the cabin feel like a cage. Another storm hit. This one was worse. It came without the screaming wind. It was a silent, heavy, endless fall of snow. For 5 days, the snow fell, piling up to the windows, burying the door, turning the cabin into an Arctic cave. The isolation was complete. The world was reduced to this single, dim, firelit room, and it forced them together. The silence was no longer possible. It became too heavy to bear. "What is this place?" she asked one afternoon. Her voice sounded loud in the muffled quiet. Elias looked up from whittling a new handle for his axe. "What do you mean?" "These mountains, what are they called?" "The Bitterroots." "Have you been over them?" she asked, gesturing to the window, now just a square of faint, gray light. "To the west, yes, there are valleys there. Warmer, but more people." He said people like it was another word for trouble. She watched his hands. The knife moved in long, smooth strokes, the wood peeling away in perfect curls. I cannot just sit," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I need to do something." He looked at her, a long, appraising look. He saw the nervous energy, the way her hands twisted in her lap. He nodded once. He stood, went to the door, and took down the smaller axe he used for kindling. He handed it to her, handle first. She took it. The weight was solid, real. "The wood box is low," he said. He taught her. He took her to the small alcove by the door where the logs were stacked, covered by an overhanging bit of the roof. He showed her how to stand, how to aim, how to let the weight of the axe head do the work, splitting the kindling from the larger rounds. Her first few swings were clumsy, glancing off the wood. "You are fighting it," he said, his voice impatient. He stepped behind her, his hand closing over hers on the axe handle. Lena went rigid. His body was a wall of heat at her back. His hand was large, calloused, completely enveloping hers. She smelled pine smoke and the clean, cold scent of him. She wanted to pull away. She was terrified. "Like this," he said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. He guided her hands, guiding the swing. Thunk! The axe bit deep, splitting the wood clean. Again. He did not let go. He made her swing again, and again. Thunk, thunk, thunk! With every swing, a small bit of her terror chipped away, replaced by the simple, satisfying rhythm of the work. He was not hurting her. He was teaching her. When the kindling box was full, he stepped back. "That's enough." He taught her other things. He took her to the stable, a warm, dim place that smelled of hay and animal musk. He showed her how to set snares, twisting the delicate wire into a loop. "For rabbits," he said, showing her where to place it in a run. "You find their path. You set it. You wait." He taught her to read the snow. "See here," he pointed. "These are deer tracks. They are moving south, to the lower valley. These are wolf." She looked at the large paw prints and shivered. "They will not bother the cabin," he said. "Not with the smoke." He was giving her survival. He was giving her work. He was giving her something other than her own dark thoughts to fill the day. One night, the storm was at its peak. The wind had returned, moaning around the corners of the cabin, shaking the small structure. They had eaten their stew. The fire was roaring. Lena sat on the furs, stitching one of his shirts, the needle clumsy in her scarred fingers. He was cleaning his rifle, the familiar ritual, the smell of gun oil. She had been thinking all day. His quiet teaching, his respect for her space. It had loosened something in her, the stones over the well of her memory. She said, her voice barely a whisper. The rifle cleaning stopped. The man, Amos, he was not the first. Elias did not move. He did not look at her. He just listened. His stillness was an invitation. My family, my PA and Ma, they died of the fever, on the prairie, in Illinois. I was 14. She did not look at him, either. She looked at the fire. My uncle took me in, Uncle Silas. He had a farm. He had a hard winter, lost his crop, lost his wife to the same fever. He drank. She paused, her breath hitching. He lost the farm to a man in a card game, but he still had me. He sold me. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. He sold me to a freight man, heading west, sold me for $50 and a mule. She was pulling the thread so tight it was cutting into her fingers. I was property. That's what the man said. I tried to run. He taught me not to. When he got to Denver, he lost me in a card game. To a miner, the miner. He passed me to another man. I have been passed around, like a skin, like a sack of flour. She was shaking. Amos, he was the first one to use a chain. He liked people to see. He said it showed them he was a man of substance, to own a thing and to break it. The cabin was silent. The only sound was the fire and the high, thin wail of the wind. Lena was braced for a reaction, for disgust, for pity, for him to say she was soiled. Elias slowly, deliberately, began to reassemble his rifle. The metallic clicks were sharp, precise. He finished, laying the gun aside. He stood up. Lena flinched, drawing back. He did not come toward her. He went to the pot hanging on the hob. He ladled steaming water into a tin cup, adding a pinch of dried herbs and pine needles from a pouch. He walked over to her. He was a large shadow, blocking the firelight. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. He held out the cup. She looked at it, confused. Tea, he said. His voice was flat. She took it, her hands trembling so hard the cup rattled. He said nothing else. He just handed her the tea and went back to his stool. He sat, picked up a piece of wood, and began to whittling, as if she had just remarked on the weather. He had not spoken. He had not judged. He had not offered comfort. He had just listened. He had heard the worst of her, and he had not cast her out. He had given her tea. She drank, the hot, bitter liquid scalding her throat, and for the first time in her life, she felt heard. That night, her sleep was deep and heavy, but it was not peaceful. She dreamt. She was at the post. The chain was cold, biting into her skin. Amos was there, his face red, his mouth open in a silent laugh. The wind was screaming. Then the dream shifted. The chain was gone. She was warm. A strong arm was around her, holding her. She was not cold. She was not afraid. She felt safe. A feeling so foreign it was almost painful. She leaned into the solid warmth, into the dark, and sighed, a deep, shuddering breath of relief. She woke with a gasp. She was alone. The cabin was dark. The fire burned down to a bed of glowing orange embers. She was in the fur pile, wrapped in blankets, but her face was wet. She was crying. Not loud, broken sobs, but silent, hot tears that ran from the corners of her eyes into her hair. She did not know why she was crying, for the terror of the dream, or for the loss of the comfort she had felt in it. The next morning, the world was transformed. The storm had broken, leaving behind a world of blinding white. The sun was out, brilliant on the new snow. It was beautiful and terrible. Elias had gone out early to clear the stable roof and check his snares. Lena woke, the cabin empty, the sun streaming in. The dream was still with her, that phantom feeling of being held. She felt unreal. The cabin, the man, the rescue, it all felt thin. She stood, his shirt a tent around her. She looked at the door. She did not make a conscious decision. She just moved. She walked to the door, pulled it open, and stepped outside. The cold was a physical blow. It stole her breath. The sunlight on the snow was so bright it made her eyes water. She walked. She was not running away. She did not know where to run. She just walked, away from the cabin, toward the line of trees, toward the edge of the frozen lake. She stopped and stood, staring at the jagged snow-covered peaks of the bitterroots. They were so large, so permanent. They did not care. They did not see her. She was lost, not in the wilderness, but in her own mind. She had been passed from one life to another, a piece of baggage, and now she was here. What was this? Another stop? Another owner? She did not feel the snow. She did not feel the cold. She was in that gray, numb place she had been at the post, the place just before the end. Elias returned, 2 rabbits dangling from his belt, and saw the cabin door ajar. A cold, hard fist of pure dread seized his heart. It was a feeling he had not had since Kansas. Wolves, Amos, or just her, gone. He dropped the rabbits, his rifle in his hand in a single, fluid motion.
Lena!
His voice was a raw bark. He saw the tracks, small, bare footprints, leading away from the cabin.
Damn fool,
he whispered, a hot mixture of fear and anger. He found her by the trees, 20 yards away, just standing, staring at the mountains. She was in his shirt. She was barefoot in 3 feet of snow. Lena, he said again, his voice softer this time. She did not move, did not turn. He strode to her, his long legs eating the distance. He did not ask what she was doing. He did not scold her. He simply did what was necessary. He scooped her up, one arm under her knees, the other around her back. She made a small, startled sound, like a bird, as the world broke in on her. She was light, but not as light as she had been. He carried her back to the cabin, his boots crunching deep. He kicked the door shut, strode to the fire, and set her down on the stool. Her feet were a waxy, frightening white.
Stay,
he commanded. He knelt. He grabbed her feet, one in each of his big hands. They were like blocks of ice. He began to rub, hard, his calloused thumbs digging into her frozen soles. She cried out, a sharp, hissing sound. The feeling was agony, 1,000 hot needles. She tried to pull away. No, it hurts!
Stay still,
he ordered, his grip like a steel trap. Or you lose them. You want to live. You stay still. He did not stop. He rubbed, forcing the life, the blood, the pain, back into her. He rubbed until the waxy white turned to a blotchy, angry red. He wrapped her feet in a dry blanket, then took another one from his cot and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking it in tight, as if she were a child. He was still kneeling before her. She was trembling, great, racking shivers, but not from cold. She looked down at him, at this rough, silent man who had just forced agonizing life back into her. His head was bent. He was breathing hard. Her hair, tangled and wild from sleep, had fallen across her face. A damp strand clung to her cheek. Elias looked up. He saw the tear track. He saw the trembling. He saw the absolute raw terror in her eyes. He hesitated, his hand, scarred and rough, lifted. Lena watched it come. She knew this. A man's hand, moving toward her face. It meant a blow. It meant pain. Her body screamed at her to flinch, to cringe, to pull away. She did not move. Her breath was trapped in her chest. His fingers, rough as pine bark, touched her cheek. They were warm. He did not strike. He did not grab. He gently, almost clumsily, brushed the damp strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. His fingertips lingered for a half-second, a bare, questioning pressure against her temple. And Lena, in that moment, did something she had not done in a lifetime. She did not think. She just felt. She leaned in. It was a tiny movement, an inch. She closed her eyes and pressed her cheek, just slightly, into the solid, warm cup of his hand. It was the first kind touch she had known. It was water. It was bread. It was air. The silence in the cabin was absolute. There was only the sound of the fire and two people breathing. Then, the reality of it struck her like a physical blow. What she had done, what she had admitted, what she wanted. She pulled back, her eyes flying open, as if she'd been burned. She was breathless, her heart hammering. The hope that flooded her was more terrifying than any beating. Elias snatched his hand back, as if his fingers had been caught in a trap. He stood up abruptly, his face a thundercloud, unreadable and dark. He turned away from her, grabbed his axe from the corner, and stalked out of the cabin, back into the bright, cold snow. Lena was left by the fire, her cheek tingling, her entire world undone. She heard the thwack, thwack, thwack of his axe splitting wood, a furious, desperate rhythm in the clean, silent air. The world began to melt. It did not happen all at once. It began with a sound. For weeks, the only noises had been the wind's howl and the crackle of the fire. Now, there was a new sound. Dripping. Water, released from its prison of ice, fell from the cabin eaves, from the high branches of the pines. It was the sound of a great unfastening. The frozen lake groaned and cracked, the noise like distant cannon fire in the night. The snow, which had been a suffocating blanket, grew heavy, wet, and began to retreat. It pulled back from the south-facing slopes, revealing the matted brown earth beneath. The smell of the air changed. It was no longer the sharp, sterile scent of cold, but a rich, complex smell of damp soil, rotting needles, and the promise of new life. Spring had come to the bitter roots. With the thaw, the tension in the cabin changed, the awkwardness that had followed Lena leaning into his hand, and his abrupt retreat had settled between them like a sheet of ice. They had been polite, silent, careful, but as the world outside opened up, the cabin felt smaller, the silence thicker. The thaw demanded change. Lena felt it in her bones. She was no longer a half-starved victim. She was a woman. Her body was strong. Her wounds were scars. And the constant, thrumming fear that had been her companion for years was quiet. It was not gone, but it had retreated, like the snow, to the high, shadowed places of her mind. She could not just sit by the fire. She began to work. She started by taking over the mending. Elias's shirts were in a sorry state, his own stitches large and clumsy. She sat by the firelight, her fingers still stiff from their old injuries, slowly regaining their dexterity. She pulled the thread, her stitches small and neat. She was mending his clothes, and it felt like she was mending something in herself. It was a simple, useful act. Elias watched her. He would sit, oiling a trap, and watch the way the firelight caught the line of her brow, the focus in her eyes. She was restoring order to his small, rough world. He had not realized how much he had let go. One morning, she followed him outside. He was heading to the wood pile. "I want to help," she said. He grunted, picked up his heavy axe, and set his shoulder to a large, frozen round of pine. He swung, the wood splitting with a loud crack. "I cannot do that," she said, "but I can do the other." She meant the kindling, the smaller axe he had taught her with. She went to the stack, picked up the axe, and began to work, her swings competent, steady. She did not wait for his permission. She just did the work that needed doing. They worked in rhythm, the deep thwack of his large axe and the lighter thunk of her small one. A conversation in wood and steel. The ground near the cabin, where the sun hit strongest, was clear. The soil was dark and rocky. One afternoon, Elias came back from the stable and found her on her knees, digging at the earth with a flat piece of bark. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked up, her face smudged with dirt, her hair falling from its hasty tie. "You have no garden?" "Ground's no good. Too high, too cold." "It's good enough for potatoes," she said, her voice stubborn. "And maybe onions, if we turn the soil, if we build a low wall to hold the sun's heat." He looked at the patch of ground she had chosen. He had never considered it. He had always hunted. Farming was from the other life, the life with Sarah. He said nothing, but the next day, he came back from a trap line with a broken shovel blade he had salvaged from some long-forgotten mining camp. He had burned a new handle into it. He left it leaning against the cabin wall. When he returned that evening, she was turning the earth, her shoulders set, her face streaked with sweat. She was building a garden, a small square of hope in the rocky soil. The work changed her. The work changed them. They were no longer a man and his rescued burden. They were two people, working against the wilderness to survive. One evening, after supper, the light was lingering long. The air was soft. Lena was washing the tin plates. Elias was checking his rifle. A nightly ritual. "I want to learn," she said, her back to him. He stopped, the oiled rag halfway down the barrel. "Learn what?" "To shoot. I want you to teach me how to use that." Elias set the rifle down. He was very still. The cabin, which had started to feel like a home, suddenly felt like a trap. A gun was not a tool for gardening. A gun was for killing. It was for hunting. And it was for men like Amos. "No," he said, his voice flat. She turned, her hands wet, the rag clutched in one fist. "Why? You taught me the axe. You taught me the snares. This is the same?" "It is not the same." His voice was hard, colder than any winter wind. "An axe is for wood. A snare is for rabbits. A rifle is for ending things." "And for defending things," she said, her chin coming up. Amos, he has a gun. All those men do. I had nothing. I was nothing. I will not be nothing again." He looked at her, and he saw the girl at the post. The defiant eye, the fire. It had not gone out. It had been banked, and now it was burning bright. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the mountains, which were turning purple in the dusk. He hated what she was asking. He hated that she was right. He had brought her here to save her from the world. But the world was still out there. It was just down the mountain, and it might come looking. He thought of his wife, Sarah. She had not known how to use a gun. He had kept them for hunting, locked away, thinking it kept his home safe, separate from the violence he heard about in the territories. He had been a fool. He thought of his daughter, May. He turned back to Lena. His face was a mask of grief and iron. "Tomorrow, at dawn." He was a harsh teacher. He took her a mile from the cabin to a small clearing backed by a high wall of rock. He did not want the sound of shooting near their home. He made her hold the rifle, his heavy Winchester, until her arms ached. "It is too heavy," she complained, her arms shaking, the barrel wavering. "It is supposed to be," he said. "You have to mean it. Hold it. Know its weight. It is not a toy." He showed her how to stand, how to brace the butt of the rifle against her shoulder. "Brace it tight, tighter. If you are loose, it will break your collarbone. You let it become part of you." He stood behind her, his body a familiar wall. He put his hand on her shoulder, forcing it down, forcing her to hold the rifle steady. "Breathe. You breathe out. You squeeze. You do not pull." The first shot, she pulled the trigger. The rifle exploded. A roar of thunder and black smoke. The recoil sent her stumbling back, and the shot went wild, embedding itself in a tree trunk high above their heads. She dropped the rifle, her shoulders screaming in pain, her ears ringing. She was terrified. It was too much. "I told you to hold it tight," Elias said, his voice unforgiving. "You did not listen. Pick it up." "I cannot." "Pick it up." She did, her hands shaking, anger and fear warring in her. He made her load it again. He made her stand. He made her brace. "Again," he commanded. She shot again. This time she was ready for the kick. The shot was closer. He set up a tin can on a stump, 50 yards away.
Hit that!
She missed. She missed again. The smoke burned her nostrils, the sulfur stinging her eyes. She was frustrated, near tears. "You are angry," he said. "Good. Use it. Do not let the rifle be stronger than you. Aim small. Just the center. Forget the noise. Forget the kick. Just the center." She took a long, shuddering breath. She raised the rifle. It was heavy, but her arms were used to it now. She braced it. She looked down the long, iron sight. She found the can. She let out her breath. She squeezed. The rifle bucked, but she held it. Clang! The can jumped, spinning through the air. Silence. Lena lowered the rifle, her arms trembling with exhaustion. She turned to look at him, and a smile broke across her face. It was not a small, hesitant thing. It was a wide, beaming, sun-breaking-through-clouds smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was the smile of a girl who had not existed for a decade, a girl who had just done the impossible. Elias just stared. He had forgotten. He had forgotten what a smile like that looked like. What simple, clean joy could do to a person's face. It lit her from the inside, chasing the shadows from her eyes. He had not seen a smile like that in 10 years. Not since May. It hit him in the chest, a sharp, sudden ache that was more painful than any bullet. This was not a victim. This was not a stray. This was Lena, and she was beautiful. He felt something in his chest crack, something he had thought was long dead and frozen. He could not breathe. I hit it, she said, the smile fading a little into uncertainty at his expression. Elias cleared his throat, the sound rough. "You did. Your shoulder is still too high. Again." He was harder on her after that, but she did not care. She had hit the can. That night, the mood was different. The lesson had broken something open. The cabin was warm, the fire casting dancing shadows. They sat on the floor, near the hearth, close but not touching. They had been silent for a full hour. It was Lena who spoke, her voice soft, reflective. "I used to dream about it," she said. Elias looked over from the hook he was sharpening. "Dream about what?" "Trees," she said, a small, huffing laugh. "Just trees, green ones. When I was with before, all I saw was mud, or the plains, or the inside of a room. I used to close my eyes and try to remember what a real forest looked like. I never thought I would see real trees again. Not like this. I never thought I would smell pine, or feel clean dirt. I thought that was all over for me." She looked at him, her eyes clear and dark in the firelight. "This place you think it is a prison, a place to hide, but for me, it is the first free place I have ever been." His hands stilled. He had seen this place as his tomb. She saw it as a sanctuary. He had no answer for that. Her admission seemed to touch a place in him, a place that had been locked. He looked into the fire, and his face, usually so hard, so controlled, seemed to crumble. "My daughter," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Her name was May. She loved trees. She would climb. She was not afraid of anything." Lena waited. She knew this was a sacred, terrible place he was going. She did not breathe. "There was a raid," he said. His eyes were fixed on the flames. "Border men. They were not soldiers, just animals. They came for whatever they could take. I was in the field. I heard the screaming. My wife, Sarah." He stopped. He swallowed. A hard, painful movement. "I told May to hide. In the barn. In the hayloft. She was smart. She knew how to be quiet. But they—" He could not say it. He closed his eyes. "I found her. After they had been thorough." He was back there. Lena could see it. He was 1,000 miles away, in a burning homestead in Kansas. "I was not there," he whispered, and the whisper was a broken, jagged thing. "I was fixing a fence, a stupid wooden fence, and they could not save her. My girl, I could not save her." His voice broke on the last word, a raw, tearing sound. He turned his head away from her, toward the darkest corner of the cabin, but she saw the gleam of moisture on his rough cheek. He brought one hand up, covering his eyes, his broad shoulders shaking with a single, silent, terrible sob. This was the mountain, undone. This was the man who had been a rock, dissolving into the grief he had held at bay for a decade. Lena's heart ached. She did not know what to do. Her own pain was a familiar coat. His was a fresh, raw wound. Slowly, hesitantly, she moved. She closed the small space between them. She was afraid he would push her away, that he would be angry at the intrusion. She lifted her hand. She rested it on his arm, the one that was braced against his knee. She felt the muscle, hard as iron, bunched beneath his shirt. He froze. His breathing stopped. He did not move. He did not pull away. He did not turn. He just stayed, frozen, under her touch. She left her hand there, a small point of contact. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. She just stayed. She was an anchor, holding him from being swept away by the past. They sat like that for a long time. The fire burned down. The log in the hearth collapsed, sending up a shower of bright orange sparks. Finally, he took a long, shuddering breath. He lowered his hand from his face, but he did not turn. Lena slowly, gently removed her hand. The moment was over. For days, the air was thick with it. The physical tension that had been a low hum now had a name. It was awareness. They had seen each other, truly seen, the broken parts. Long glances across the cabin were no longer observation. They were searching. When he would hand her the coffee cup, their fingers would brush. It was a jolt, like a static shock, and they would both pull back, their eyes meeting for a half-second before looking away. The cabin was too small. The air was too thin. One evening, Elias was outside, chopping the last of the big rounds before darkness fell. He worked with a fierce, focused energy, the axe rising and falling, the heavy thwack drumbeat against the coming night. He was working off the restlessness, the feelings that were crowding him. Lena came to the cabin door. She did not say anything. She just watched him. He had taken off his outer shirt. He was in his linen undershirt, dark with sweat. It clung to his back, to his shoulders. She watched the muscles move under his skin, the power in the simple act of splitting wood. This was the man who had carried her. This was the man who had taught her. This was the man who had cried. She was not afraid of him. Not anymore. She was not afraid of his strength. She was drawn to it. She walked out of the cabin, her feet bare on the cool, damp earth. She walked up behind him. He did not hear her. He was lost in the work. She stopped, just behind him. She could feel the heat coming off his body. She could smell the sweat and the pine. She lifted her hand. This time, there was no hesitation. She laid her palm flat against the center of his back. Elias froze. The axe, mid-lift, stopped. He did not move a muscle. He did not breathe. He stood, poised, the axe heavy in his hands. Her hand was small and cool against his burning skin. It was not a touch of comfort. It was not a touch of gratitude. It was a touch that asked a question, a touch that claimed. He stayed frozen for a long second, then another, then, slowly, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, he lowered the axe. He did not turn. Lena did not move her hand. That night, the silence in the cabin was unbearable. It was a living thing, a third person in the room. He sat on his stool, sharpening a knife that was already razor sharp. She sat on the furs, her hands knotted in her lap. Finally, she stood up. He watched her. She walked over to him, not to his side, but in front of him. She knelt on the floor, at his feet. She was eye level with his hands. He stopped sharpening the knife. She looked at his hands. They were scarred, the knuckles busted, the palms thick with calluses. A hunter's hands, a killer's hands, a savior's hands. She reached out and laid her hand over his. He looked down at her small, pale hand, with its own pink scars, covering his. "I want to feel safe," she whispered, her voice so low it was almost lost to the fire. "With you." He looked at her, his eyes dark, searching. He did not understand. He had given her a fortress. He had taught her the rifle. What more could he do? "You already are," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "No," she said, looking up, meeting his gaze. "I mean, I want to feel all safe, not just from him, from everything. I want to not be afraid. When I am near you, when you look at me." He finally understood. She was not talking about Amos. She was talking about this, the space between them. He said nothing. He just watched her. So she acted. She leaned forward, still kneeling. She rose up, balanced on her knees, and she kissed him. It was slow. It was uncertain. Her lips were soft, and they tasted of the herbal tea she drank. It was a simple press of her mouth to his. It was a question. Elias did not move. He was a statue of stone. She pulled back, her eyes wide, afraid she had crossed a line, afraid she had read it all wrong. And then he moved. He dropped the knife. It clattered to the stone hearth. He put his hands, his big, rough hands, on her shoulders. He did not pull her. He did not push her. He just held her. He leaned in, and he kissed her back. It was not a kiss of hunger. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of acknowledgement. His beard was rough against her skin. His lips were firm and hesitant. It was clumsy and real, and it was the most honest thing that had ever happened to her. She sagged against him, her head falling to his shoulder, her hands clutching his shirt. He put his arms around her, pulling her from her knees onto his lap, holding her as if she were a child, and as if she were a woman, and as if she were the only other person in the world. They did not speak. There were no more words. They ended the night there, by the fire. He wrapped them both in the bearskin, and she curled against his chest, on his stool, her small body fitted to his. They were not lovers. Not yet. The scars, his and hers, were too deep for that to be simple. But they were no longer strangers. They were two broken pieces, two lonely souls, who had, in the deep, silent wilderness, found a way to fit together, and for the first time in 10 years. Elias did not dream of fire and death. He dreamed of nothing. He just slept. That first kiss, by the fire, had unfastened something. The small, careful spaces they had kept between them were gone. The cabin, which had been a shared shelter, became a home. It happened not in a rush, but in a slow, sweet, and steady deepening, like the thaw moving into the high country soil. The small touches came first. When he passed her in the narrow space between the cot and the table, his hand would rest on her back, just for a moment, a silent acknowledgement. When she handed him his cup of coffee in the morning, her fingers would linger on his, and he would not pull away. They were relearning a language they had both forgotten, a language of simple, kind contact. They began to cook together. Elias, for 10 years, had eaten to survive. His meals were a rotation of boiled beans, salt pork, and charred venison. Lena, retrieving faint, ghost-like memories of her mother's kitchen, began to change that. She had found a patch of wild onions by the creek, and she added them to the stew. She took the flour he had kept for trade, and, with a bit of hoarded yeast, she made a heavy, rough bread. One evening, he watched her, her face flushed from the fire, her brow furrowed in concentration as she kneaded the dough. He had not smelled fresh bread in a decade. when she pulled the dense, golden brown loaf from the Dutch oven. He looked at it, then at her, and she saw something in his eyes she had not seen before. Awe. It was just bread, but it was also civilization. It was a home. The sleeping arrangement changed by necessity. The fur pile, on the far side of the hearth, was a cold place. The fire's warmth did not reach it. One night, Elias, without a word, had taken her pile of furs and tossed them onto his cot. It was a wide cot, built by him, sturdy and large. She had hesitated, her heart hammering. "Floor's cold," he had muttered, his back to her, as if it were a matter of simple logistics. She had laid down, her body rigid, her back to him, leaving a wide, chaste space between them. She did not sleep, listening to the sound of his breathing, so close in the darkness. He did not move toward her. He simply existed, a solid, warm presence at her back. Slowly, night by night, the space had narrowed. The cold was a constant, practical force. They drifted toward each other's heat, an unconscious animal instinct. First, they were back to back. Then, she had woken one cold dawn, curled on her side, and he was curled behind her, his body a perfect, protective shield against the cabin's chill. Then came the morning. Lena woke not to the cold, or to the smell of coffee, but to a feeling of weight, a pleasant, solid, comforting weight. She was warm, deeply warm. She lay still, her mind in the soft, gray space between sleep and waking. Something was different. She opened her eyes. The light in the cabin was a pale, pearlescent gray. The fire was embers. She was on her side, facing the wall, and there was an arm draped across her waist. Her body went rigid. The old terror, the one she had lived with for a third of her life, seized her in a cold, brutal grip. A man's arm, in her bed, holding her down. She was about to cry out, to fight, to tear herself away. But the arm did not move. It was not a brutal grip. It was not a claim of ownership. The hand that rested on her hip was loose. His fingers relaxed. It was heavy. It was just there. She lay perfectly still, her heart hammering so hard she was sure it would wake him. She could feel his chest against her back, the slow, deep, rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing. He was sound asleep. This was not an act of possession. It was an unconscious drift, a seeking of comfort in the night. Slowly, carefully, she let the breath out of her lungs. The panic subsided, leaving a strange, vibrating new feeling in its place. She was held, not chained, not taken, just held. She examined the feeling. The arm was heavy. It was Elias. It was the man who had cleaned her wounds, who had taught her to shoot, who had cried in front of her. His arm, across her body, felt protective. It felt right. A small, quiet, secret thing happened. Lena smiled. It was not the big, beaming smile of triumph from the rifle practice. It was a slow, inner smile, a curve of her lips that was just for her. She felt safe, wholly, completely, deeply safe. She did not move. She did not dare break the spell. She lay there in the gray dawn, under the weight of his arm, and for the first time in her memory, she felt truly, perfectly, at peace. That morning, when he woke, he had found his arm around her. He had pulled it back as if burned, a look of sharp confusion on his face. But she had just looked at him, her eyes clear and calm, and his confusion had softened. The line was crossed. They were in this small, silent cabin. The days grew longer, warmer. The snow was gone. Save for the high-shadowed places, the garden they had started became their shared obsession. They built a low wall of rock, salvaged from the scree slope, to hold the sun's heat. The work was back-breaking. They worked side by side. He would pry a large, buried stone from the earth, his muscles straining. She would be there, ready to help him roll it, her hands small and strong next to his. They were both stained with the same dark, rich soil. The intimacy, born in safety, now began to spark with a different kind of energy. The long, lingering days were matched by a new, restless tension in the evenings. The sun would set late, painting the peaks in impossible shades of purple and blood orange. The fire in the hearth was no longer a tool of survival, but a companion. They would sit, not on opposite sides of the room, but together on the floor, their backs against the cot. One night, she had been exhausted, her shoulders aching from hauling stones. She sat on the floor and leaned her head back against his knees. He had frozen, as he always did. She felt the tension in his legs. Then, his hand, hesitant and clumsy, had come to rest on her hair. His fingers, rough as bark, had gently, slowly begun to stroke. She had closed her eyes, a deep, shuddering sigh of pleasure escaping her. The kisses were no longer a single, hesitant question. They were a given. He would come in from checking his snares, the cool, twilight air clinging to him, and he would find her at the fire. He would put his hands on her shoulders, turn her, and kiss her, a hard, brief press of his mouth to hers. It was a grounding, a return, a claiming. She grew bolder. She was not a passive recipient of his quiet affection. She had, in this high, clean air, rediscovered her own will. One evening, he was on his stool, his head bent, mending a tear in his leather harness. She was restless, full of an energy she did not understand. She walked to him. He looked up, his eyes questioning. Without a word, she sat on his lap. He went rigid. She was impossibly light, yet a solid, real, and terrifying presence. He had not held a woman like this, not since Sarah. He did not know what to do. Lena put her arms around his neck. She could feel the hard, panicked hammering of his heart against her breast. "You are warm," she whispered, a simple fact. She tugged, gently, at the leather thong that held his long hair, the one he had tied in place that morning. It was a playful, teasing gesture, a thing she had not done in a lifetime. He caught her hand, his grip hard, stopping her. "Lena?" His voice was a low, strained warning. "Elias?" she answered, her voice soft, but not afraid. Their eyes met. The space between them was electric, charged with a decade of his loneliness and a lifetime of her fear. And under it all, something new, desire. He kissed her. It was not the chaste, grounding kiss of his return. It was a hungry kiss, a desperate kiss, a kiss that held all the confusion and want and fear he had been bottling up. It was clumsy and hard, and his beard was rough against her skin, and it was the most wonderful thing she had in her life. She laughed when he pulled away. He had startled himself with his own passion. He looked stunned, like a man who had been struck by lightning. She laughed, a small, breathless, rusty sound, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He stared at her, at this laughing, bright-eyed woman on his lap, and he was lost. But he was also a man haunted by ghosts. This was too much, this joy, this lightness, this wanting. It was the territory of the life he had lost. It was a betrayal of Sarah. It was a danger. A man with nothing to lose was safe. A man with this was a target. He began to pull back. He became quieter. He worked later. He would go to check trap lines that did not need checking, returning long after dark. He would chop wood, the rhythmic, furious thwack of his axe echoing in the valley long into the twilight, splitting rounds they would not need for a year. He was trying to exhaust the feeling, to exhaust himself. Lena saw it. She knew this retreat. She had lived her whole life watching men retreat into their own darkness. She would not allow it. He had taught her to be strong. He had taught her to aim, to be steady, to hit her mark. He had taught her to survive. She would not let this one, good, beautiful thing be lost to the ghosts. She would not let him be lost. That night, the fire was burning low, casting long, flickering shadows. Elias sat on his stool, his shoulders hunched, staring into the embers, 1,000 miles away. He was back in Kansas, his face a mask of old, cold grief. Lena was on the cot, watching him. Her heart ached. She knew what she had to do. It terrified her. She got up. She was wearing his shirt. It had become her uniform. Her comfort. It fell to her knees. A soft, worn gray wool. She walked to him. He did not look up, but she knew he was aware of her. "Elias," she said. He looked up, his eyes dark, troubled, full of shadows. "Go to sleep, Lena?" "No," she said, her voice quiet, but as firm as the mountain rock. She took his hands, his big, rough hands. They were cold. She pulled. "Get up!" He resisted, a look of confusion crossing his face. "What?" "Please," she said. He followed, a large, uncertain shadow. She led him, not to the door, not to the fire, but to the cot, to their cot. She pushed him, gently, on his shoulders. He sat, his knees wide, his hands limp. He looked like a lost, overgrown boy. She stood before him, the firelight at her back. She was shaking, her hands, her knees, her soul, but her eyes were clear. She did not sit on his lap. She knelt, and she straddled him. Not in a playful way, but in a deliberate one. Her knees were on the furs, on either side of his hips. She was facing him. She was his equal. The firelight caught the line of her legs, bare beneath the long shirt. It outlined her face, her eyes dark, serious, resolute. "Lena," he said, his voice a strained, broken rasp, a plea, a warning. "Do not do this. Do not make me feel—" "Shh," she whispered. She placed her hands on his shoulders, on the solid, bunched muscles. "It is all right. I know. You are a good man. Elias, you are afraid. I know what that is. So am I." She leaned closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. "But I am not what they made me. I am not broken." Her voice was a fierce, passionate whisper, a new forged thing. "I am not a used, spoiled thing. I am me, and I still want—" His eyes widened, the grief and shadows pushed back by a raw, startled shock. "I want to feel," she said, her voice breaking just a little, but her gaze holding. "I want to choose. I have never chosen. I was taken. I was sold. I was passed." She took one of his hands, his big, scarred hand, and she placed it on her heart, over the wool shirt. "Let me choose this. Let me choose you." His granite face, the one he had worn as armor for 10 years, broke. The lines of grief, of anger, of iron-hard control, they just crumbled. He saw her. He saw her, not as the girl at the post, not as his rescued stray, not as a victim. He saw Lena, whole, strong, terrifying in her honesty. He lifted his other hand, his fingers, which were trembling, tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing her lower lip. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. Then she kissed him. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss of choice. Their union was not the frenzied passion of a saloon backroom. It was not the desperate, clinging act it would become. It was something else entirely. It was slow. It was reverent. It was emotional. He was terrified. His hands, which could split a log or kill a man, were clumsy, shaking, afraid to bruise, afraid to reawaken a single, bad memory. He treated her body not as a thing to be taken, but as a sacrament. And she, the guide. She was the one who was choosing. She was in control. She was unwrapping a gift she had never been allowed to touch. Her own desire. It was a reclamation. Every touch, every kiss, every movement was her, saying, "This is mine. This is me. I am not broken." After, in the deep, profound silence of the cabin, the fire long since burned down to a bed of pulsing red embers. They lay tangled in the furs. The room was still. Then Lena began to weep. They were not the silent, desperate tears he had seen before. They were deep, shuddering, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Elias's heart seized in a grip of pure, cold panic. He had done it. He had pushed her. He had broken her trust. He had been a brute, just like all the others.
Lena!
He choked, trying to pull away. "I am sorry. I did not—" She did not let him go. She clutched at him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. And she turned, pressing her wet face into the hollow of his neck.
No!
She gasped, her voice thick, muffled against his skin. "No, you do not understand." She pulled back, lifting her head to look at him, her eyes luminous, her face a mess of tears and relief. "I did not think," she sobbed, a fresh wave coming. "I did not think I would ever feel clean again." He held her. He just held her. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight, his own heart breaking and healing. All at once, he said nothing. There were no words for this. He just kissed the top of her head, his beard rough against her damp hair. And he held her. He held her as she wept for the girl she had been, for the woman she was, and for the life she had just chosen. The next morning, he woke first. The sun was streaming in. She was asleep, her face pressed into his shoulder, her breathing even, her hand clutching his shirt. She looked young, peaceful. When she woke, she found him watching her. She did not flinch. She did not hide. She looked at him, her eyes clear, and Elias smiled. It was not the grimace he used as a greeting. It was not the tight set of his jaw. It was a real, slow, genuine smile. It started at his mouth, and it traveled all the way up to his eyes, crinkling the corners, chasing away a decade of ghosts. Lena stared. It transformed him. He was a different man. She smiled back. Life, which had been a partnership, now became a union. They were a we, they were building, the garden was thriving. They had planted the potatoes and onions, and the small, green shoots were pushing up, defiant and strong. "We will need a place to store them," Lena said one afternoon, her hands on her hips, her face smudged with dirt. "For the winter." "A root cellar," Elias agreed. He was looking at the cabin. "Under the floor, by the hearth. The ground is dry." "And the cabin," she said, her voice hesitant. "It is very small. For two—" He looked at her, and he understood. "It is small." "We could," she said, daring, pointing to the south wall. "We could build a new room. There. It would get the sun. A place for us. For the winter. A place to live." He looked at the wall, then at the stand of pine on the north slope. "We can cut the timber. It will be hard work. Take all summer." "I am not afraid of hard work," she said, her chin high. He nodded. "Neither am I." They were planning a future, a room, a garden, a cellar, a life. The idyll lasted 3 more weeks. 3 weeks of sun, and hard work, and shared meals, and quiet nights spent in each other's arms. Then, one high, clear afternoon, it ended. They were in the garden, clearing the last of the stones. Lena was laughing, a sound that had become as natural as the creek's gurgle, as Elias lifted a truly massive, impossible rock. He stopped. The rock, held halfway, was forgotten. His head was up, his body tensed. He was a hunter. Listening, he stared, not at her, but down the valley, down the thin, winding trail that was the only path to his cabin. "What is it?" Lena asked, her laugh dying on her lips. "A rider," he said, his voice flat, all the warmth gone. She dropped the stone in her hand. She followed his gaze. A black dot, a man on a horse, moving slowly, picking his way up the trail. "A trapper?" she said, her voice a thin, hopeful whisper. "Maybe he's lost." "Maybe," Elias said. He did not take his eyes off the dot. He stood, frozen, for a long minute. Then the rider stopped, and a second black dot emerged from the tree line, joining the first. 2, Elias said, and the word was a death knell. Lena's blood, which had been warm and flowing, turned to ice. She did not need to see their faces. She did not need to be any closer. 2 riders, coming for her, one to claim, one to watch. She knew. She was back at the post, the chain cold on her wrist, the taste of blood in her mouth. "Lena," Elias said, his voice hard, but not directed at her. "Go inside. Stay away from the window." She did not move. She was frozen. He strode past her, his face a mask of iron. He went into the cabin. She heard the sharp, metallic click-clack of the lever. He was loading the Winchester. He came back to the door, the rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He leaned against the door frame, a solid, unmovable boulder of a man. "He won't take you back." The words, so simple, so absolute, broke her paralysis. He was not running. He was not hiding. He was standing. The riders made camp down the trail, just out of rifle range. They were confident. They would wait for morning. They knew they had their quarry trapped. Night fell. The cabin, which had been a home, was now a fortress and a trap. Elias was all business. He checked his ammunition. He had a second rifle, an older, heavier caliber one. He loaded it, checking the action. He propped it by the door. He sharpened his axe. He did not speak. Lena sat on the cot. She watched him, this man, this quiet, broken man, who had shown her what it was to be whole, this man who had saved her, who had taught her, who had loved her, and tomorrow he would die for her. "Elias," she said, her voice quiet but clear. He looked up, his eyes hard, his face shadowed. "If I run," she said, her voice gathering strength, "if I go right now, while they sleep, I can go north, over the pass. It is dark. They will not see me. He will follow me. He only wants me. He will leave you be." She stood up. "This is not your fight. It was never your fight." He stopped what he was doing. He walked over to her until he was standing in front of her. He was so tall, so solid. He crouched, so his eyes were level with hers. He took her hands. They were cold. He chafed them in his... "I have been hiding for 10 years. Lena," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "I have been running. I ran from Kansas. I ran from everything. I came up here to let the world forget me. I am done hiding." He looked into her eyes, and she saw, for the one, true, final time, that the ghosts were gone. There was no fear. There was no grief. There was just her. "And so are you," he said. "This is our home. He is not taking you. He is not taking this. He is not setting foot on our land." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Let him come." She looked at him, this man who was willing to stand against the whole, brutal world for her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a new, hard fire was kindling. A fire he had lit. She nodded. Once. That night, sleep was impossible. The air was too thick, the future too short. Tomorrow, they would face the guns. Tomorrow, one, or all of them, would be dead. The knowledge stripped away everything but this one last night. He came to her, at the cot. He stood before her, the moonlight from the window painting him in silver and shadow. He did not speak. He just looked at her, his eyes drinking her in, as if to memorize her. She reached out her hand. She pulled him down. They made love. It was not the slow, reverent union of their first time. It was not the tender, playful exploration of the days that followed. It was fierce. It was desperate. It was two living, breathing souls, clinging to each other on the very edge of the abyss. It was a defiant, furious human act. It was a promise. It was a farewell. It was a battle cry. It was all the words they did not have, all the future they would not get. They were claiming each other, one last, final time, in the face of the men who were coming to tear them apart. It was a fire against the endless, coming cold. The sun rose on a day that felt like a betrayal. It was a beautiful, clear mountain morning. The air was clean, the sky a high, aching blue, and a small breeze rustled the new, green leaves of the aspens. It was a day for planting, for living, not for dying. They came just after dawn, as Elias had known they would. They did not try to hide. They rode bold as brass into the clearing, reining in their horses 100 yards from the cabin, just beyond the edge of the new garden. There were 3 of them. Lena, watching from the single, small window, felt her breath catch, her stomach turn to ice. She knew the one in the middle. Amos. He was bigger than she remembered, puffed up with arrogance and new clothes. He wore a city hat, not a working man's, and a coat that strained across his soft belly. The 2 men who flanked him were different. They were not from 2 Forks. They were hired. They were lean, hard, watchful men, with the unmistakable look of men who killed for pay. They wore twin revolvers, low on their hips. They were the kind of men Elias had run from. "That's him," Lena whispered, her hand flat against the rough log wall. "The one in the middle, Amos." Elias was not by the window. He was by the door, his body in the shadows, the long, heavy barrel of the Winchester resting on the doorframe, aimed at the center of the clearing. "I see him." Amos cupped his hands around his mouth. His voice, a booming, arrogant bellow, shattered the morning peace. "In the cabin. I know you're in there. Mountain man, and I know you got what's mine." Elias was silent. He did not move. He was a statue, a part of the cabin's shadows. "I am a reasonable man," Amos shouted, his horse shifting beneath him. "I'm here for my property. Bought and paid for. You send her out, and we'll let you live. We'll just take back what's mine." Silence. The 2 hired guns shifted in their saddles, their eyes scanning the trees, the cabin, the dark, unmoving shadow that was Elias. They were uneasy. This was not a town. This was the mountain man's home. "You hear me in there?" Amos roared, his voice cracking with impatience. "I got a deed, a bill of sale. She belongs to me." He fumbled in his coat pocket, pulling out a folded, dirty piece of paper. He held it up, waving it in the air. "It's all legal. I paid $50 for her. She's mine." "He's lying," Lena whispered, her voice shaking with a cold rage she had not known she possessed. "He won me in a game. He is lying." Elias's voice was low, but it carried in the still air. It was not a shout. It was a cold, hard statement, like a rock falling. "She's not property." The simplicity of the statement stunned the clearing into silence. Amos, his hand still in the air, looked confused. "What'd he say?" one of the hired guns muttered, leaning toward Amos. "He said she's not property," Amos sneered, his red face darkening. "Think you're a moral man. Up here, a preacher. She's a whore, and she's mine." Elias's hand tightened on the rifle. "Ride out," he said. "Ride out now. This is your only warning. You are not welcome on this land." "My land?" Amos bellowed, a furious, wet laugh. "This is nobody's land, and you ain't nobody. You're just a filthy trapper. You think you can steal from me? From Amos?" He turned to his men. "He's just one man. This'll be easy." One of the hired guns, the leaner one, with a long, pale scar down his cheek, spat on the ground. "This ain't easy. Amos, this is his box. We're in the open. You ain't paying us enough for this." Amos's face contorted. "What? You're backing down?" "I'm saying," the man said, his hand resting on his gun. "This is a standoff, and the man in the box usually wins. You want her, you make him come out, or you burn him out." Amos seized on the idea.
That's it. Burn him out. We'll burn the whole damn cabin. Burn it to the ground.
He looked at the cabin, his little eyes full of spite.
You hear that, mountain man? Send her out, or we'll smoke you out like a rat. We'll burn your whole filthy life down.
Lena's garden, the new room, the life they were building. She looked at Elias. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He will not burn this home. He stepped back from the door, into the cabin's gloom. Lena, go to the stable.
What? No, I am not leaving you.
You are not leaving, he said, his voice impatient. He grabbed the heavy, older caliber rifle and thrust it at her. The stable. There's a knothole on the left wall. It looks over the clearing. You know how to load this. She looked at the heavy gun. It was not the one she had practiced with. It is loaded, he said, as if reading her mind. You aim, you brace, you squeeze, just like I taught you. You do not fire. You understand? You do not fire, unless I am down, or unless they try to light the fire. You aim for the one with the scar. She was terrified, but she was not the girl from Two Forks. She nodded, her face pale, but her eyes resolute. I understand.
Go,
he said.
Through the storage. Stay low.
There was a low, covered trench, dug last fall, that connected the cabin's small root cellar to the stable. It was for moving supplies in deep winter. Now, it was a battle line. Lena crawled through the dark, cold earth, the heavy rifle digging into her back. She smelled the damp soil, the scent of her potatoes, and the fear, sharp and metallic, in her own throat. She emerged in the warm, animal-scented darkness of the stable. The horse, sensing her fear, whinnied.
Shh, boy,
she whispered. She found the knothole. She rested the heavy barrel in it. She had a clear view. She could see Amos and his men, still mounted, arguing. She could see the cabin. She could not see Elias. She was alone, in the dark, with a rifle, and the men who had come to take her. But she was not at the post. She was not chained. She was armed. The day dragged on. The sun, which had been a comfort, became an enemy. It beat down on the clearing. Amos, unused to the thin mountain air and the heat, was visibly wilting. He and his men had dismounted, taking cover in a small stand of rocks. Just at the edge of the clearing, they were out of easy range, but they were not leaving.
This is stupid,
Amos yelled, his voice hoarse.
We can wait. We got supplies. You gotta come out sometime. You gotta get water.
We've got the creek, Elias's voice called back, disembodied, from the cabin. We've got a spring in the cellar. We've got food for a year. You? The silence from the rocks was his answer.
This is a mistake, Amos,
Lena heard the scarred man say, his voice a low, angry growl.
He's dug in. He knows this place. We're on his ground. Shut up,
Amos snapped.
Just shut up. He's one man. We'll wait.
The sun crawled, a burning, indifferent eye, across the sky. In the cabin, Elias did not move from the door. He was a creature of absolute patience. He had waited 10 years for his rage to die. He could wait 3 days for these men to make a mistake. In the stable, Lena sat, her eye pressed to the knothole, the heavy rifle in her lap. Her arms ached. Her back was stiff, but she did not move. She watched. She saw a bird land on Amos's horse. She saw the scarred man clean his fingernails with a knife. She saw the world, her world, held hostage. As the sun began to dip, painting the western sky in fire and blood, the tension broke.
I am done with this,
Amos roared, standing up from the rocks.
I am not spending the night out here. I am burning him out, now! Sit down, you fool,
the scarred man yelled, pulling him back.
They'll pick you off. No, I'm doing it.
Amos was in a full-blown, childish rage. He pulled a flask from his pocket, drank deeply, and threw it to the ground.
He thinks he's better than me, that mountain goat. I'll show him.
He fumbled in his pockets, pulling out a match. He looked at the cabin, then at the small, dry patch of grass near the woodpile. He's going to do it, Lena whispered, her heart stopping. Elias's voice was a low growl.
Lena, he moves for the woodpile. You fire. You aim low. He is threatening our home. Lena, you fire.
The scarred man saw the desperation.
Amos, no!
But it was too late. Amos, in his rage, grabbed a torch he had made from a branch, lit it, and made a stumbling, desperate run for the woodpile.
Now, Lena!
Elias roared. Clang! It was not Lena's rifle. It was Elias's. The sound was sharp, flat. The tin can that Lena had been practicing on, which had been sitting on the woodpile, jumped 10 feet in the air. Amos shrieked, dropping the torch, and scrambled back to the rocks, falling on his face. Silence. That, Elias' voice called, conversational, almost calm, was my last warning. The next one is not a can. The sun is setting. You have 2 choices. You ride out or you die here. Your choice. The scarred man had had enough.
He's right. Amos, this is done. She ain't worth this. No woman is...
He stood up, his hands in the air.
We're going! We're going!
No! Amos screamed from the ground.
I am not...
The scarred man kicked him.
Get up, you pig! We're leaving!
He grabbed Amos by the collar, hauling him to his feet. He looked at the second gunman.
Get the horses!
The second man, who had been silent all day, nodded, relief clear on his face. He ran for the horses. In the stable, Lena let out a breath she had been holding all day. It was over. They were leaving. She let the heavy rifle barrel droop.
Not yet,
Elias's voice called. Was he in her head?
No, he was close. He was in the trench.
Stay ready, Lena. It is not over until they are gone. The scarred man and the other gunmen mounted. They hauled Amos, who was weeping in a fit of rage and self-pity, onto his horse.
We're going,
the scarred man yelled.
We're done. Don't shoot.
They turned their horses. They began to ride, slow and steady, back down the trail, into the deepening shadows. Lena watched them go. The scarred man, the second man, and Amos in the middle. She watched them until they were almost at the tree line.
It's over,
she whispered, a tear of relief rolling down her dirty cheek. And in that instant, she saw it. Amos, in a final, spastic fit of rage, pulled a pistol from his coat. He was not aiming at the cabin. He was aiming at the scarred man, in the back.
No!
She screamed. The shot was muffled. The scarred man slumped, falling from his horse. The second gunman, seeing the betrayal, yelled and spurred his horse into a full-blown, terrified gallop, disappearing into the trees. Amos was alone. He turned his horse, his face a mask of pure, insane triumph. He had his pistol. The mountain man was in the cabin. The woman was where? He saw the stable.
You!
He screamed, his voice a cracked, high-pitched thing.
You're in there, ain't you? It's all your fault.
He kicked his horse, raising the pistol, and charged. Not the cabin, but the stable.
Lena!
Elias's roar came from the trench. Lena fumbled with the rifle. It was too long, too heavy. The knothole was wrong. He was coming too fast. The stable door burst open. Amos was there, his horse rearing, its eyes wide with terror, filling the doorway. He was a black, monstrous silhouette against the dying light. I'll drag you back to... She did not fire. She screamed. And then Elias was there. He came out of the earth, a vengeful spirit, launching himself from the trench. He was not a farmer. He was not a recluse. He was the man from Kansas, the man who had hunted down 5 men. He was pure, cold, focused rage. He hit Amos, tackling him clean off the horse. The 2 men and the horse went down in a tangled, screaming heap in the mud and the last dirty patches of snow by the stable door. The horse scrambled to its feet and bolted. The pistol flew from Amos's hand, spinning, landing in the snow-dusted mud near the garden. Lena, her heart a trapped, frantic bird, scrambled from the stable, her heavy rifle useless, forgotten. Elias and Amos were on the ground, rolling, struggling. Amos was big and soft, but he had the strength of a panicked bear. He was screaming filthy, terrible curses. He was all nails and teeth and desperate, flailing limbs. Elias was silent. He was just working. He landed a blow, his fist connecting with Amos's soft face, a sickening, wet crunch. Amos roared in pain, and his hand, fumbling, found a rock, the one Lena had been prying from the garden. He raised it. Elias caught his wrist, but Amos was big, and his other hand was fumbling at Elias's face, his fingers digging, trying to find his eyes.
"I'll kill you!"
Amos shrieked, froth flying from his lips.
"She's mine!"
He was pushing Elias back, his weight a terrible, suffocating thing. Elias's head hit the mud, and he grunted, his grip on the rock-wielding hand slipping. Lena stood, frozen. It was happening again. A man fighting over her. A good man was going to die because of her.
"No,"
she whispered. Her eyes saw the pistol. It was lying in the mud, dark and metal, 10 feet away. She was not the girl at the post. She was not the girl who had been sold. She was not the girl who had been passed. She was the woman who had learned to shoot. She was the woman who had planted a garden. She was the woman who had chosen. She ran. She slid in the mud, her hands fumbling, grabbing the pistol. It was heavy. It was cold. It was real. Amos, seeing her, let out a howl of pure, triumphant rage.
"See, she's come back to me!"
He was still on top of Elias, his hand raised. Lena stood. She raised the pistol with both hands. Just as Elias had taught her, she braced.
"Get off him,"
she said, her voice a low, cold, terrible thing. Amos froze. He looked at her. He saw the gun. He saw her face. And for the first time, he saw her. He saw the woman, not the property. And he saw his end. "You wouldn't," he stammered, his eyes wide.
"I own—"
"Get off him!" Amos, in a final act of spite, of desperation, turned his rage back to Elias. "If I can't have you." He raised the rock, bringing it down. Clang! It was not the sound of the rifle. It was the sound of the pistol. The sound of the shot was flat and small and terrible in the dusk. Amos stopped. His body went rigid. The rock fell from his hand, thudding softly on Elias's chest. He looked down at his own chest, where a dark, wet, red flower was blooming on his fine city coat. He looked at Lena. His mouth opened. He looked confused, as if he had been cheated. A small, gasping, wet sound came from his lips. And he fell. He did not fall like a man. He fell like a sack. He crumpled, sideways, off of Elias and lay twitching in the snow and the mud. He gasped. Once, twice. His legs kicked. And then he was still. Silence. The world went silent. The high ringing in Lena's ears was the only sound. The wind had stopped. The birds had stopped. There was only the sight of Amos, bleeding out, his blood a dark, obscene stain on the pure, white patches of snow. The pistol fell from her hands. It clattered to the stones by the garden. She stared at what she had done, at the man she had ended. A sound, a groan. Elias. He was pushing the dead weight of Amos's arm off his chest. He was sitting up, his face a mask of mud and blood. But his eyes were on her. He got to his feet. He was slow. He was aching, but he was alive. He walked to her. He did not look at the body. He did not look at the gun. He looked at her. She was trembling.
A full body, rattling, violent tremor. She was back at the post. She was cold. "Lena," he said. His voice was raw. She looked at him. She saw the cut on his cheek. She saw the mud in his beard. She saw him. He reached her. He put his hands on her shoulders. "It's over," he said. And she broke. She did not weep, as she had in his arms. She did not cry, as she had in her sleep. She broke. It was a full, catastrophic collapse, a keening, animal wail of a lifetime of terror, and pain, and rage, and fear, and relief. Tore itself from her throat. Her legs gave out. He caught her. He did not let her fall. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her up as the sobs tore through her, holding her as she screamed and wept and let go of all the years, all the pain, all the chains. He held her, his own face pressed into her hair, his eyes closed. He held her tight, a living, breathing, solid wall against the terrible, final, bloody silence of the coming night,